Our next presentation will address the economic value of water resources here in the San Luis Valley, and as they will note, and as some of you may have seen, I think in the last day or two, they just published this report that came out, and so they're going to give us information about just the economic significance of the Rio. Excuse me. So to introduce our speakers, first Heather Dutton grew up in the San Luis Valley, where she gained a love for agriculture and the outdoors. She has worked as the manager for the San Luis Valley Water Conservancy District since 2016. The greatest reward of this position is the opportunity to work with friends in the water community to find creative ways to manage water and natural resources in the upper Rio Grande Basin. Prior to working for the district, Heather was the executive director of the Rio Grande Headwaters Restoration Project. She serves on the Interbasin Compact Committee, Colorado State University Water Center Advisory Board, and Colorado Rio Grande Restoration Foundation Board. Emily Wolf has a master's in water resources from the University of New Mexico and worked with the School of Civil Engineering at the University of New Mexico on water quality analysis and community science. She has worked on erosion mitigation and community-led river and watershed restoration, education, and policy initiatives on landscapes and with diverse communities across Colorado and New Mexico, including tribal, agency, and private partners. And finally, Claire Sheridan is a senior economist with One Water Econ, a small woman-owned Colorado business. She specializes in natural resource evaluation, economic impact analyses, water affordability, and market-based approaches to water management. Claire hails from Golden, earned an MS in natural resource economics from Colorado State University, and worked in agricultural water conservation on the Western Slope before joining the One Water team. So I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Great, thanks Paul, thank you for having us. Hey everybody, good morning. Thank you so much for taking time out of your Saturday to come hang out with us and to hear what we have to say. Really appreciate you still sitting in your seats. And so yeah, as I mentioned, I'm Heather Dutton. I manage the San Luis Valley Water Conservancy District. I'm going to kick off our panel. Yeah, it did it. Okay, great. We'll be talking about the value of water today. And so when we think about this question, what is the value of water? And specifically, what's the value of water in the San Luis Valley? And I imagine each of you has a different thought about that question, informed by your own perspectives and your own relationship with water in the San Luis Valley. Some of you might be thinking about water as a property right, as tied to farming and ranching, and so therefore the value is based on what you can produce with that water, either a crop or cattle or other opportunities. Others of you might have thought about the value of water being added to rivers, to float boats and take people fishing. And still others of you might have thought about the value of water in this valley at the National Wildlife Refuges and that intrinsic value of supporting wetland ecosystems or just providing habitat for migratory birds. And so it's a really complex question to answer. What is the value of water in the San Luis Valley? And in 2022, we were tasked with answering that question as Douglas County considered a proposal from Renewable Water Resources, also known as RWR, to export 22,000 acre-feet of water from the San Luis Valley to Douglas County every year. The county commissioners held a series of meetings to look into the project, and one of their meetings was based on economics, and they asked that question because RWR was proposing, well, they would give the community of the San Luis Valley a $50 million community fund, and that would help the community, and that would deal with any consequences of moving the water out of here. And so those of us that were working in opposition to this effort came armed to try to explain that the value of water in the San Luis Valley is so much greater than a one-time payment of $50 million. We provided information about how the Crane Festival in Monte Vista generates $4 million a year and how the visitor statistics to the Great Sand Dunes National Park. We even had statistics of the numbers of visitors to the hot springs along the Sangres. And then of course we talked a lot about agriculture. We looked at the Colorado Department of Agriculture and the USDA stats I dusted off an old report that CSU had created for us, a tool that looked at the value of agriculture and the secondary impacts of different crops and acreages of those crops. And it's just apparent that just as water flows through this community, so do the dollars that are generated from that water. And we're able to look at, I actually brought a prop, we're able to look at things that are harder to quantify, such as a farmer using water to grow wheat, to then sell to a local mill, to then sell to a local bakery, who just this morning, Tumbleweed Bakery in Monte Vista opened their new storefront. And this is locally grown, this is locally made bread with locally grown grain that I brought for you, Claire, because I already gave Emily hers. So thank you for being here, Claire. Thank you for coming down and visiting our community. And it's just so hard to quantify and to really, in an hour-long meeting with people on the Front Range, to truly explain what the value of a drop of water means to this community. But we tried. We brought all that information, and there's so much more that exists. And so after that conversation, Faye Hartman with American Rivers, who's one of Emily's colleagues, had this idea, well, what if they could put together a team, get some funding, and help us gather the data that's out there that we just weren't able to assimilate fast enough, and maybe it wasn't like data and needed a little bit of number crunching, maybe even create some new data. What if we were able to create a document that helped us better understand and explain the value of water in this valley? And so that's what they did. American Rivers has been an incredible partner to the water groups in the San Luis Valley for many years in education and outreach, and especially in that effort with RWR. They were just a huge supporter of the work and the storytelling to try to support the people of this valley. And so we're here today to tell you about what was done, why and how, and to hopefully better express and explain the value of water in the San Luis Valley. So again, thank you for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to Emily.
Thanks, Heather. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Paul. All right. Perfect. Okay. So great to see everyone today. My name is Emily Wolf, and I'm the Rio Grande coordinator with American Rivers. And so we're a national organization that does community-based, across the country, clean water and river protection work. And as Heather mentioned, this is such a crucial issue here in the Valley. Just thinking about the Rio Grande as critical to the region's economy and all of its values, and is coming under increasing pressure. So prioritizing and valuing water conservation, we see is really beneficial to the community across the valley, helping the agricultural economy by increasing water efficiency and reliability of water supplies for water rights holders. In addition to these threats, the Rio Grande is often overshadowed by other rivers in the Southwest, including the Colorado River. This results in less focus on and funding for the Rio Grande and a more limited understanding and appreciation of the value the Rio Grande provides across the region. To ensure this river receives the attention it deserves, both through an acknowledgement of its importance and the unique opportunity for increased resources to improve the health of the river and the communities that depend on it, a greater understanding of the value of this river is needed. With active collaboration with partners in the valley, including San Luis Valley Water Conservancy District, Wetland Dynamics, Colorado Open Lands, and many more, American Rivers partnered with One Water Econ to produce this report, which identifies and amplifies the unique values of the river and the benefits it provides across the valley and the Southwest. Projects and partners are already doing incredible work collaborating on projects which tackle irrigation efficiencies, wetland and habitat preservation, and river protection. So when we do these projects together, there's a clear multi-benefit rationale for projects across the valley. And just to emphasize, as we look at, and Claire describes the different sectors and their values, we're looking at not comparing them against each other, but how they're mutually reinforcing and can really work together. And so in the last part of the presentation, Heather then will be talking again about how this specific examples of how these reinforcing benefits play out in local initiatives. So we and One Water Econ worked together throughout 2024 last year and initiated by Faye, as Heather mentioned, to identify sectors to evaluate, holding sessions with local partners along the way to share progress and invite feedback into the data being explored, the scope of the report, and the methods by which it values ecosystem service benefits associated with water resources. And Claire will go into some of the methods in the next section. Going forward, as we share this report and tell the story, we'd love to work with you all to explore ways we can add appropriate detail, context, and information that you may have been collecting as we share with various audiences and think about how this information could be scaled across different communities. Today, there's not an analysis of this kind for the Valley, and we, along with our partners, believe it will help connect and build the case for keeping water in the San Luis Valley, as well as provide important data to support the many benefits that the valley and the water that runs through it provide across and between different industries, locally, statewide, and regionally. So I'll hand it over to Claire.
Thank you so much. And I'm actually going to move over here because I don't want to be looking behind me the whole time I'm trying to talk to you. Okay, so I know it's not everybody's favorite thing to spend their Saturday talking about economics, but we're going to get through this together. I'm just going to start with some key terms. They're going to come at you fast, and I'll come back to them. They'll make more sense in application. We talk about ecosystem services, and those are all of the benefits that people receive from nature and natural processes. In this particular case, we're looking specifically at water. The benefits are the things that we try and put a dollar value on so that they're easily conveyed to people at stakeholder levels. Benefits can include use values, like if you go boating or fishing, and also non-use values, like to habitat. They can also include a willingness to pay. So sometimes things are traded on the market, right? If you go and buy bottled water, you know exactly what that water costs. But there are things like, what is it worth to you to have the sandhill cranes come here every year? And that's gotten at through studies of what economists call willingness to pay. And there's a bunch of different ways to get to that, but we're going to come to some of those benefits that are valued through that willingness to pay metric. So there's also economic impacts. Impacts are really how money flows through an economy. And when we think about the benefits of water to an industry, those really show up as impacts. Impacts can be your employment, how many people work for you, what are their salaries, what's your value added, and your output, your total sales. So you'll see some of those numbers up here today. There's also 3 different kinds of economic impacts to make it even more complicated. You have your direct effects, which is, let's say I'm a barley farmer. My direct effects are the people that work for me and my total sales, things like that. Your indirect effects are the things that you need to buy or your inputs to create that barley. So you're purchasing insurance for your crops, you're buying fertilizer for your soil, you're having to pay electricity to pump your water from the groundwater aquifer. So those are your indirect effects. You have backwards linkages in your economies. There's also induced effects. So when you pay a worker a salary, they go back to their home and they spend that money in their community on bread, and those impact your local economy as well. So together, your direct effects, your indirect effects, and your induced effects are your total economic impact for an industry. When you take the ratio of those direct effects to your indirect and induced, that's your economic multiplier. So that's for every $1 spent, you generate X dollars in your local economy. So hopefully these will become clearer as we move through some of these examples. I'm going to start with everybody's favorite and the obvious, the irrigated agriculture in the San Luis Valley. So I relied heavily on Colorado Division of Water Resources Division 3 data for this analysis. I compared also with a National Agricultural Statistical Survey, just to look at total acreage, type of irrigation, amount of irrigation, crops grown, those sorts of things. As you can see, there's a lot of purple and green. That's alfalfa, grains, pasture, cover crop, and a little bit more in this area. We've got some vegetables and potatoes as well. There are about 400,000 acres of irrigated cropland every year in the valley. About 80% of cropland in the valley is irrigated. That's probably not a surprise to anybody given how little rainfall you have here. If you're not irrigating, you're probably not growing very much. So the interesting thing about agriculture in the San Luis Valley sort of higher scale perspective is that the valley makes up less than 0.01% of the total population, but contributes 40% of Colorado State agricultural output. So a very outsized impact, right? Water has a huge influence in the valley, but also at the state level. Okay, here's those numbers I was telling you about. Agriculture and ranching is the largest private employer in the valley. Just for irrigated ag, we estimated there's about 3,800 jobs generated in the valley, which is about 8% of all jobs in the valley. The thing that really stands out to me here is these indirect and induced effects. So it's these middle two lines for both value added and output. Value added is your GDP, output is your sales. Those make up almost 50% of your total impact. In non-nerd speak, what that tells me is that all of the ag producers are purchasing their inputs locally. They're buying from insurance providers that are located in the valley. They're generating a lot of backwards linkages. We use a software called Implan for these input-output analysis that gives us this data. And one of the sort of downsides of using that software is that there's not really a way to look forward. So Heather had mentioned, like, let's say you have a wheat farmer in the valley and they're selling to a bakery. The sales to the bakery are not captured here. So in that far box that says every $1 spent generates 156, that's only looking backwards. I think there's probably a lot higher impact if we were to look forward in this economy. All right, the last thing I'll say about ag is that there's very significant industry clusters. There's, I don't know if it's made it into this PowerPoint presentation, but there's some pieces of paper with a QR code in the back. You can look at the full report that we did. There's a report, the section in there on the entire economy in the SLV, and there's a chart that shows industry clusters. So clusters are hard to categorize because they sort of cross multiple industry codes. But there's a huge finance sector. There's an enormous insurance sector. There's a very outsized machinery sector, right? And those are all things that go into generating a healthy and successful agricultural output. So the input of water to this one little industry of ag has enormous impact throughout this sector, or throughout this entire economy here. Okay. Water-dependent industries that are not agriculture are also incredibly important to the valley. These are industries that rely on water as an input. So you think about hospitals, car washes, restaurants, colleges, right, where we're at right now. These are all industries that may make business decisions to locate or to expand based on whether or not water is available and what they think water might be in the future. This industry, or all of these industries together, so we have about 39% is manufacturing. That includes things like petroleum refineries, slaughterhouse, like meat processing facilities. Those are very water-intensive industries in the SLV. The healthcare and social assistance is 37%. 22% of this entire circle is just hospitals, and we all really want hospitals to stay in the valley, right? So water's an enormous input there. I wish I would have known about that bakery. I would have put their logo up here as well. The most important part of this entire slide is that 23% there on the bottom. It's the employment. Almost a quarter of all jobs in the San Luis Valley, not including ag, are directly tied to an industry that relies on water. So water is enormously important for jobs and all the industries beyond agriculture as well. Okay, I had not actually heard that, was it 50 million? I'd not heard that statistic, but this is the slide that came up when I heard you say that they were gonna offer you 50 million. So the value of domestic water supplies, that's your drinking water, right? That's probably the biggest one we can think of, but often the most overlooked. I looked at the EPA Safe Drinking Water Information System as well as the FEMA replacement cost values to think about the value of domestic water supply in the valley. We have about 74% of the population on community water supplies, and the rest are on domestic wells. Everybody, almost without exception, gets their water from the aquifers. And I know that with the overdraw, that has created a bunch of problems down here as well in terms of contamination, and that could be a whole nother presentation. But how we think about the value has two components. So FEMA uses this when they're thinking about like benefit costs for emergency management. The first is that willingness to pay component, right? If you go to your tap and you turn on your water, what are you willing to pay to make sure that you can drink that water? What is that worth to you, right? There's a welfare component to that. It's like a wellness of being, that you're able to know that your water is clean and safe to drink. The other component is this avoided replacement cost. So if you have to go out and buy water, or your utility has to come in and provide water to you, then that's also an avoided cost of being able to drink your water, right? Those two things combined come out to about $77.23 per person per day. When you apply that to the population of folks that live in the valley, it's about 3.6 million per day, and that comes about 1.3 billion per year. So that $50 million just doesn't quite get us there, does it? All right, this is the fun one, right? Water-related outdoor recreation. This is what recreation is always the most tricky to try and capture because it's so unique to any individual place, and particularly in the San Luis Valley, there's just often not that great a data to understand really who's coming here to recreate, who's using water as part of their recreation experience. We relied on a survey that was done by the Business for Water Stewardship from 2020 on water-related recreational activity. That gave us user days and activities. So a user day is one person doing one recreation activity per day, right? So if I go camping for 3 nights in the San Luis Valley, that's 4 days of camping. That would be 4 user days, right? So the dark blue lines in this graph are user days. The light blue lines is the total value. So this Business for Water Stewardship report gave us user days broken out by activities. Now, to get at that value, what is it worth to me to go camping in the San Luis Valley for a night? I had to look at a whole variety of very interesting studies, right? Like, what are people willing to pay to go whitewater rafting in the Poudre Canyon? And what are people willing to pay to go fishing on the South Platte? And we pulled together all of these sort of independent research studies on Colorado and the Southwest for recreation and willingness to pay, and tried to assign a value to that day. Now, your value of what it is worth to you to go whitewater rafting for a day is probably more than you're gonna spend, right? Because if it costs more than you're willing to pay, then you're not gonna pay it to go. So the value is higher than your willingness to spend on that. So what we see here is that water sports has both really high user days in the San Luis Valley and also the highest willingness to pay. So if I'm an economic development person who works down here and I'm looking at this graph, I would know to invest in my water sports, right? That other category includes hunting and snow sports. I think one of the, well, there's a lot of flaws here, but one of the hard things is that this was done pre-COVID, right? And we know that recreation has changed dramatically since COVID. The other is that it does not include RV camping, and I know every time I drive past that huge RV park off 160, it is packed to the gills all season, right? So this is probably a lot higher in terms of where we're at today. This blue box over here has that multiplier, again, $1.91 generated per every $1 spent in recreation. This is based on the Colorado statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation report, the SCORE report. Colorado puts it out every 5 years. This is based on 2014 data. They released their new study just last year, and that dollar value is actually closer to $3 now. So the money people spend in recreation has an enormous impact in local economies. This report also estimates about 3,300 jobs. So that's right up there with irrigated ag in terms of employment in this region. This is a picture of the Del Norte Water Park. I've been lucky enough to catch high enough flows to play there. It's so fun. Okay. The last couple values we'll touch on here are the values to wildlife as well as cultural heritage. So I hit the jackpot with a study that was done in 2020. It was a survey of willingness to pay of residents and visitors to the Rio Grande River Basin. So it covered all 3 states where the Rio Grande passes, and looked at, what is your willingness to pay to continue to have wetlands and stream flows in the Rio Grande. So I applied that dollar value for wildlife habitat to all of the residents in the San Luis Valley. But we had to try and get at the other people who visit the San Luis Valley and may have a willingness to pay to support habitat here that don't necessarily live here. So we applied it to that 1.4 million state park pass holders in the state of Colorado as an approximate to get an estimated $50 million just in willingness to pay for habitat, right? And those are to visitors and to the people who live here. We heard a lot in the last presentation about the cultural heritage value that people may hold for the existence of the river, the being able to look back generations. The river has been there for everybody and will continue to be there for people in the future, right? And so that value applied just to the residents of the valley is almost $500,000 in and of itself every year. Finally, we had mentioned this just a little bit earlier. There's an economic impact study just for the crane migration in the valley, like that one specific species, that one specific time of year. It brings about almost 20,000 people, which is almost half the population of the valley, to here to spend their dollars visiting, tourism, different, supporting your restaurants, supporting your breweries, and that generates about $4 million in direct spending here. Okay, we got through it. As a summary, real quick, this is not supposed to be additive. This is supposed to show that all of these uses of water have incredibly high values, right? And the purpose of this report is not to say, well, we should do this versus this. It's to say that we should consider all of these different values when you're looking at implementing restoration or conservation projects. How can we really support all of these different categories when we're investing our dollars in our water resources? So to speak to that, I'm going to invite Heather back up here. Or you can stand.
Yeah, thanks. Awesome. Thank you, Claire. Fascinating as always. And so yeah, what's the point? What do we do with this? I think, going forward, this information can help us with the education and the advocacy work just directly on, that initial question that kicked off this study, which was how do we explain to people outside of the valley the value of water here? And again, obviously there's more to be done and we can continue to build on this, but this is such a great point for us to be able to have some talking points. Poor Robert Sakata and I have been at all the same meetings this spring, and he's been hearing me pound on that stat. We're less than 1% of the population, but this area generates 39% of Colorado's agriculture output. That's huge. This place matters to the larger ecosystem of Colorado, and then you look at the examples across the different industries as ways that what we're doing here influences the rest of the state and the region and is important and is worth protecting. And so we're hoping that this is a tool for us to continue to tell that story and continue to advocate for the valley, but then also education internally. Hannah with Rig Wiki is working on bringing up the next generation of water leaders. And so helping these students understand, if they're interested in economics, which some kids are, then helping them understand, why this matters and that having a career working in water or working in all these different careers. I'm looking at Richard in the back. He's a county planner, but his passion for water is huge, and I consider him part of the water community. And so there's all these, this I think points out to us the connectivity, how water does touch all of us, and really we are all part of the water community, even if you don't work for a water conservancy district. And so helping, people understand our place and our role. It also helps us advocate for and support the work that we're doing with multi-purpose projects. And so I put up here some before and after photos from the Rio Grande Headwaters Restoration Project. Connor and Daniel are here, and they've got a table. You can visit with them. They're doing such incredible work, and Adam mentioned them as part of the forestry panel that, you know, Connor and Daniel and Cassandra are, I mean, they're rock stars, the amount of work that they fit in a day and are spread throughout the valley trying to help with different projects and things. And so this is the Independent and Arrowitz project. It's up near South Fork, and it's such a great example of where the top picture shows an agriculture diversion that was built in a W shape. It was kind of cutting edge at the time when it was built in the late 90s, early 2000s, but then it started to fall apart and it became a big boating hazard. So it wasn't working well for the irrigators. They were struggling to get their water when they were in priority, and it also was really hazardous for the boaters. This is a stretch that gets a lot of traffic from the local boating community, both, you know, people out on the weekends like me, or people that have come here and are paying to go fishing in this region. It's a big challenge. And so to then put in a structure that's going to help support agriculture and support that, you know, irrigated agriculture economy with this new diversion structure, while also supporting recreation. This is a gold medal fishery, and so it really is very popular, and it also, of course, you know, we want to make sure that we're supporting that fishery there too. That's a great example of one of these projects where now we can take the information from the study and communicate to funders and advocates and, you know, partners across the state and the federal level. You know, now when we are seeing a greater level of conversation about federal funding coming to rural communities like ours, being able to have this data to explain why a project like this, why putting yellow equipment and grouted boulders in the river matters to our greater economy, it's a continued asset. And so these are just a couple examples of how we'll use this data. I think we can open it to questions. Let me look, Paul, how are we doing? I want to keep us on time. Looks like we have a few minutes, or do you want to break? Okay. We're trying to catch up so that everybody can get to lunch on time. People joke, but I think it's true. It's always a little dangerous to be the panel between you and lunch. So we don't want to cause a stampede here.
No, we've got time. We've got, about 15 minutes. We're right on time. So.
And maybe while I'm holding the mic, I just want to, again, thank you guys so much. I know I'm a broken record, but it's really impactful that you're here to hear what's going on. And I also just hope that you leave today, yes, with this realization that some of the information we heard this morning is really challenging. We are going into a very dry year on the heels of multiple dry years, and this community has got to adapt. We have to figure out how to live in our new normal. But I hope that you will also leave here incredibly encouraged by the people that have spoken and will talk about the great work that's being done. I myself am in water every day, and so it can be heavy. But I'm also just uplifted almost to tears, because I'm a crier, pretty regularly by this incredible community and by the people that are committed to saying, okay, we have to do something about this, and then they are. And so I just wanted to also encourage you to see the optimism and see the inspiration in our community members, because there are some really wonderful people, these ladies on the stage, the folks that are speaking this afternoon. We have a lot of great leadership here, and so please don't walk away from this saying, wow, Paul really put together a downer, because he's worked really hard to show you guys that, yes, we're dealing with big challenges, but there are a lot of people working really hard. So, okay.
And while Paul is going back there, just to mention, can you go forward one to see? No worries. Oh, perfect. Okay. The full report can be found at this link here. And as Claire mentioned, I have a few handouts, but those kind of break down the different sectors. If you're interested, those also can be found at that link if you want a sector-specific page.
Right. My question is, so on the diversion that spurred this study, what is the status of that? And if it's still ongoing, is that a state level policy advocacy effort that's needed, or is that more local and dealing with the local here and then in Douglas County?
Yeah, great question. Thank you for that. the status of the RWR proposal is that they haven't gone away, but they were unsuccessful in getting Douglas County to be their buyer. And so without an end user, they can't move forward. They can't file something in water court. They can't file for the needed permits to build the project. They need a buyer. And so they continue to maneuver on the Front Range, and we try to keep a close eye on what they're up to and just find the opportunities where we can share the story of the valley, and where also we can continue to jump in if needed. You know, if they ever did find a buyer and there was a water court application, of course the water community and others in the valley would be right in the middle of that court case. But right now there's nothing active for us to, you know, be pounding the drums and fundraising and telling all of you guys to get out on the streets for the parade. And so we're just keeping an eye on it and trying to make sure that we know what's going on.
Thank you. My question is, from an economic standpoint, the Rio Grande Conservation District recently established the value of an agricultural acre foot at approximately $3,000 an acre foot. They raised some money from the government to buy water rights at that price. We have a 1.3 million acre foot plus deficit in the aquifer. At $3,000 an acre foot, that comes to almost $400 million as a debit to the water wealth of the valley, which I don't see you registering in your calculations. So my question is, agriculture is not going to be able to pay the $400 million deficit with the structure of agriculture as it is. Nice as it is to have, you know, wheat turned into bread in one bakery here, the fact is that the amount of wheat we produce here is exported all over the world. So which one of these wealth-rich sectors besides agriculture is going to be in a position to pay this $400 million deficit?
That's a very good question, and we did actually look at that as part of our analysis, and made the decision to steer clear of a dollar per acre foot value because it is a very spicy subject. And that wasn't the purpose of the report, but it is a really good point that you bring up, that like I've done a lot of work in the Colorado River Basin as well, and much like in that basin, there will need to be changes in the future of how water is used on agricultural lands and the value of that water as an input. I think we've not accounted for water and the value of water as an input to ag all over the American West. So I know there's some presentations later this afternoon on ag, and maybe they can get a little bit more to how we can combine some of these conservation practices to really enhance the value of an acre foot of water that's used in ag. But your point is a good one, and I don't have a politically neutral answer for it.
Maybe time for one more question.
Thank you. This is more of a statement than a question, but don't you think that recreational values are perhaps undervalued, because recreational activities, which generate, I think you said, $1.91 for every dollar spent, they're non-consumptive. So not only do they generate that extra value, that water goes downstream, so consumptive people can also add value, economic value. So in my opinion, at least, recreational activities don't get their full share of credit.
I think that's an astute observation, and it's very tricky trying to get at the willingness to pay for recreation, right? Especially as it applies specifically in this one location. I also suspect that willingness to pay is probably a lot higher, and so that recreational value is likely a conservative estimate. But your point is a good one, and the dollar spent on recreation and tourism, there's also these immense value-added economic development benefits that aren't a part of this presentation, but you think about riverfront projects, there's a ton of economic literature on the value of generated by putting in a riverfront, whether it's a walkway or a water park, where people can come, and then all of the businesses that sprout up as a result of that, right? So it can, these little little investments in your water and your recreational infrastructure can have a much outsized impact on your local economy.
Great. Well, thank you again to our panelists. Appreciate their time.